In Fanzolo, Villa del Trevigiano, 3 miles away from Castelfranco, is the farm described below belonging to the Magnifico Signor Leonardo Emo. The cellars, the granaries, the stables, and the other places of the villa are lined up on either side of the main building. At the end of each of them there is a dovecote which is useful to the master and ornamental. To all these places you can go walking under a covered space, which is one of the main things that you require in a house in villa, as we mentioned before. Behind this building there is a square garden measuring 80 campi trevigiani. A little river flows across it and it makes the place even more beautiful and enjoyable. Paintings by Battista Veneziano adorn the villa. The Emos were present in Venice from the 10th century, as attested to by documents dating back to the year 997, after they had moved from Greece. In every time over the centuries there were members of the family who hold lots of important positions in the government of the Serenissima of Venice, named podestà, ambassadors, general superintendents, and procurators of the Serenissima Republic. The first purchases of land in the Castelfranco area by family date back to the 14th century. But the one who had the fundamental role for the expansion and development of Fanzolo farm was Leonardo Emo, for example, cultivating maize he had just imported from America. It was this Leonardo, Alvise's son, who was named Junior to distinguish him from his grandfather Leonardo Senior, who commissioned the villa in Fanzolo to Palladio, probably between 1556 and 1559. That's the origins of Villa Emo, one of the most beautiful examples of functional architecture by Palladio. The barchesse, completed at their ends by the 2 colombare, are united through porticos to the main body. The building underwent radical restorations around 1744, not only in the main body but also in the barchesse, whose use turned from rural to residential. Later, in the 19th century, also the garden changed its original Renaissance appearance to a romantic variation. The decoration of the main body took place around 1565, with frescoes by Giovanni Battista Zelotti. On the basis of Veronese's lesson, he affirms here his taste and style. In 1565, the villa, in all its splendor, became the background of the wedding of Leonardo Emo and Cornelia Grimani. The barchesse of Villa Emo are today the business center of Credito Cooperativo Bank. Villa Emo is based on 2 perpendicular lines, the horizontal one made up of the so-called barchesse and the vertical one that is the path leading to the villa. The facade is symmetrical and is embellished by simple forms such as the cube and parallelepiped. The central body is slightly protruding from the axis of the 2 barchesse and is composed of a main floor, a service one, and an attic. The facade that leads to the interior has the same features of a Greek temple, for example 4 Doric columns which support an entablature with a smooth frieze, while the pediment boasts the decoration of the 2 winged Victories made by Alessandro Vittoria, who hold the coat of arms of the Emo family. 2 long porticoed side wings start from the main body of the villa, the barchesse. They are at the core of the agriculture company. There are 2 identical blocks, each with 11 big rounding arches and a dovecote at the end. Yet, originally the barchesse not made only the central body more aulic, they also protected both owners and workers from sun and rain. Actually, the lateral bodies and the central one had a 3-span separation, but in 1745 Francesco Muttoni united them to adapt the villa to the aristocratic habits and needs. Palladio used cheap materials like mortar, wood, and brick or brickwork for shafts. Just the flight of steps, the farmyard and column bases are made of stone. Venetian villas are adapted to the local setting and the building is integrated with the surrounding landscape. Indeed, Villa Emo has a huge garden marked by a gate. The park has about 60 different species of plants, but that's not the park whom Palladio refers to in his treatise, because he has been changed many times throughout the centuries. Scholars attribute the frescoes in Villa Emo to the painter Battista Zelotti, who was companion and collaborator of Paolo Veronese in the Hall of the Council of Ten. He also worked on the ceiling of the Marciana Library in Venice and on the Palladian construction sites for Villa Godi and Villa Foscari known as La Malcontenta. The frescoes were painted around 1565, just before the wedding of Leonardo Emo, the owner of the villa, and Cornelia Grimani. Of the whole Palladian complex, the main floor is the only frescoed part. In the painting cycle at Villa Emo, there are images of pagan origin, mainly taken from the repertoire of Ovid's Metamorphoses, combined with Christian subjects and episodes taken from Roman history. They all mirror an artist in his mature period from a stylistic chromatic point of view.
Thanks to a monumental staircase, you reach the so-called loggia of the villa, which from the outside looks like a Greek temple's facade, composed of 4 slender Doric columns, of a simple entablature with a smooth frieze, and of a triangular gable holding the Emo family's coat of arms. The loggia is characterized by a coffered ceiling, and inside it is rich of frescoes, in contrast with the sober appearance of the villa itself. In fact, all the length of the walls is decorated with painted Doric columns, adorned with garlands of flowers and fruit, characterized by elements such as the rose, the quince, and the pomegranate, which are fertility symbols. The same subject is continued in the first big fresco of the loggia, located above the main entrance, in which the material divinity Ceres is depicted. The goddess is relaxed, lying on her left side, and she is surrounded by agricultural tools, seeing that she is a protector of harvest. Next to the fresco, there are 2 monochromatic busts, contained inside the shell, representing Juno and Callisto, both protagonists of the 2 main frescoes of the side walls. These 2 refer to the myth of Diana and Callisto from the Metamorphoses of Ovid. In the fresco of the western wall is depicted the moment in which Jupiter seduces Callisto, a nymph of Diana, pretending to be Diana herself. Jupiter is recognizable thanks to the presence of an eagle holding a lightning in its beak, and a typical feature of the god. On the eastern wall is represented the scene in which Juno transforms Callisto into a bear to punish the infidelity. In fact, you can notice the hands of the nymph becoming paws. Even in this fresco, there's a symbol which allows you to recognize Juno, which is the peacock located on the left. The room of Jupiter and Io, situated in the south area of the right wing of the villa, is characterized by walls divided by Corinthian columns. The painting cycle tells a love story between Jupiter and Io, taken from Ovid's Metamorphoses. The narration starts from the northern wall with the fresco that represents the scene in which Jupiter, having fallen in love with Io, tries to seduce her. The 2 protagonists, sitting on a rock together, are embracing and kissing. Jupiter is recognizable from the eagle, his traditional attribute, that holds a lightning. Behind the 2 lovers, there are thick clouds created by Jupiter to hide Io from Juno, his wife. However, Juno is able to spy on them. In the following scene, Jupiter is caught by Juno, and so he turns Io into a heifer, trying to hide her from Juno's eyes. In this fresco, we can also see Juno asking for the heifer as a gift, while Jupiter does not agree to her request. The narration follows on the southern wall, where we can see Juno giving Io to Argo. Once she has obtained the animal, she orders the 100-eyed giant to look after it. As a consequence, Argo ties a rope around the neck of the heifer so it could not run away. In the second fresco, on the same wall, Mercury, the messenger of the gods, tries to put Argo to sleep with the sweet sound of his flute, so Io can run away. The end of the story is represented on the eastern wall, where is depicted the scene of the victorious Mercury who decapitates Argo, while Io gets ready to run away free. In the last scene, Juno, on a chariot pulled by 2 peacocks, arrives to help Argo. According to the myth, Juno will spread Argo's 100 eyes on the tail of the bird, giving it the well-known future, and taking this animal as her own symbol. Facing each other on the upper part of the walls are the allegories of spring and autumn, both painted in gold-yellow monochrome. They are enclosed in false niche. The first one is recognizable from the crown of flowers, while the second one from the crown with wine branch and clusters of grapes. In the middle of the northern wall, above the door, inside a false architectural structure, hangs from a painted ribbon the painting representing Ecce Homo, Jesus presented to the crowds after the flagellation and arisen by the soldiers. This image teaches that suffering and sacrifice can defeat passions. The true grotesque dressing rooms are placed symmetrically at the sides of the vestibule that leads to the respective passageways. The word grotesque comes from the buried remains of Nero's Domus Aurea, discovered in the grottos of the Esquiline Hill in Rome in 1480. In the dressing room of the Villa Emo, they are in pairs in frames that are repeated on the opposite wall. They are identical but in reverse position. The subjects refer to the four elements: earth and water, air and fire. In the east dressing room, the earth symbol and the aquatic one are depicted. The earth grotesque is represented by a small statue of Proserpina, who stands under a pergola. In the top part, there are two winged cupids with flowers, fruit and a mask. In the bottom part, there are two satyrs and a carved gem with a small figure holding a scythe, the personification of death. In the water grotesque, two satirical masks support a canopy at both hands, of which there are two putti holding a fishing line with 3 and 2 turtles. Under the pavilion, we can see the triumph of Amphitrite, wife of Neptune, who leads a dolphin. Below the goddess, inside a gem, there is the image of a woman leaning on a cane. The Gorgon's head is hanging from the gem and has, at its sides, 2 war trophies, symbols of the Emo family's maritime victories. In the grotesque dressing room, 2 symbols are depicted: fire and air. The fire grotesque is composed of a little temple, at the sides of which there are 2 prophets who are praying and evoking the spirit of a dead ancestor. In the lower part of the grotesque, there are 2 Greek sphinx. In the air grotesque, 2 ribbons depart from a large mast decorated with 2 horns of plenty and 2 side female figures who are holding 4-leafed clovers and garlands of fruits and flowers. In the center of the panel, we find a big red cameo with a woman near a fire, who symbolizes divination. Below the gem is placed Pan near 2 satyrs and his 2 symbols, a flute and a panpipes. The ideal connection between the 2 dressing rooms is obtained by means of the symbolism of the scale. In the grotesque, the scale is held by a woman. Under the scene, we see 2 panthers, symbols of fertility, and 2 dragonflies, symbols of speed. In the middle, there is a violet cameo surrounded by 2 figures, with their long necks twisted together, and with long leaves taking the place of their lower limbs. At the top, we see 2 satyrs and 2 bronze anthropomorphic figures. The iconological interpretation is very complex. These allegories may allude to the 4 elements as well as the fertility of nature. The iconography is related to the natural context of the villa, and the 4 elements are related to farming and fertility, thus evoking its function of farm.
The Venus room is situated on the north side, to the right of the central hall, and is characterized by walls divided by Ionic columns. Door and window archives, as well as the base of the columns, are decorated with mock frames. The paintings by Zelotti depict the love story between Venus, the protagonist of the whole, and the beautiful Adonis. In the painted scene above the fireplace, we see the beginning of the myth. According to Ovid's account, Venus is unwillingly bit by one of the Cupid's arrows, thus falling in love with Adonis.
The goddess is depicted in the act of extracting the dart that hit her. The second painting depicts Venus trying to deter Adonis from hunting, one of the favorite pastimes of the young man. Behind the figure of the goddess, a luxuriant rosebush can be noticed, symbol of Venus, and, among the trees, the rosy face of love that closely watches the scene is to be found. In the third fresco, we can see Venus, who holds Adonis on the point of dying. While hunting, he has been deadly wounded by a wild boar. On the spot where Adonis' blood fell, anemones have sprouted. Unlike the previous story, the atmosphere is totally different. The colors are darker, the sky is light grey, and the tree is bare. Above the southern door, we find the sacred image of Jerome in the desert, which shows spiritual love as a way of salvation from the seductive love of Venus. The saint is depicted as an old man who is offering his prayers and supplications. The lion, the iconographic feature of the saint, is seen advancing behind the rocky bouldering joining the two figures. On the wall above the door, towards the salon, is the golden bust of Venus, surrounded by a rich garland of flowers and fruit. In the plumes of the arches there are winged figures, victories most likely. The spaces between the columns are filled with festoons of flowers, leaves, and fruit. Hercules' room, situated in the north of the building in its left wing, is characterized by walls that are subdivided by Ionian fluted columns that stand on a basement decorated with painted marble tiles. The architraves of doors and windows are also decorated with false cornices. This room is entirely dedicated to Hercules' stories, as suggested by the three large panels which decorate the walls. Hercules embraces Deianira, Hercules throws Lycus into sea, east wall, and Hercules at the stake, west wall. The frescoes are inspired by Hercules' adventures as described by Ovid in the 9th book of his Metamorphoses, and have as a main theme Hercules' transformation into a god. Ovid narrates that, on his way back to his homeland with his spouse, Deianira, Hercules was forced to wade the impetuous river Ivenus. On this occasion, the centaur Nessus offered to take Deianira to the other bank, but then tried to kidnap her at the end of the crossing. This first story is illustrated by Zelotti in the left panel on the east wall, where Hercules has just rejoined Deianira after fatally injuring the centaur Nessus with poisoned arrows. The dying centaur lies at their feet, guilty of trying to steal Hercules' spouse during the crossing of the river. The scene is framed by false architectural elements, a round arch that stands on two pillars. Seeking revenge on Hercules, the centaur Nessus pretended to regret his actions and convinced Deianira to keep his blood and spread it on her husband's clothes as a magic filter to ensure the hero's eternal fidelity. Many years went by and Hercules took part in many glorious deeds far away from his wife. One day, Deianira heard that while away from home, her husband had become infatuated with the beautiful Iole, daughter of the kings of Thessaly, Euryte. To regain her husband's love, Deianira, remembering the centaur's words, decided to make him wear a vest soaked with Nessus' blood, and asked the unsuspecting slave Lycus to deliver it. The fatal vest gave Hercules excruciating pains. He was so mad at Lycus that he threw him to the sea, as we can see in the second fresco on the east wall. Hercules, with his usual characteristics, the club, the skin of the Nemean lion, and the quiver, is depicted in the act of throwing into the water the poor Lycus. We only see the legs and part of the vest of. The third scene, which is significantly placed above the hall's fireplace, narrates the tragic end of the story. Hercules burns on the pyre, while Philoctetes, whom he had ordered to light the fire to end his tragic pain, gets away from the fire holding the hero's quiver, bow, and arrows. In the middle of the east wall, above the door that leads to the central hall, the allegory of fame stands out, elegant and bright, against a background of variegated marble. It is depicted as a woman covered by only a thin veil, with two big white wings and a long trumpet. This image clearly relates to the myth of Hercules, as it is surrounded by the hero's characteristics: the club, the skin of the Nemean lion, and the quiver. The sense of depth is given by the elements protruding from the frame, the wing, the trumpet, and the chiaroscuro effects. In the middle of the south wall, above the door that leads to the grotesque dressing room, we find a false golden cartouche that frames a panel with the sacred theme of Noli Me Tangere, a phrase uttered by Jesus after coming back to life and addressed to Magdalene. This religious theme suggests a reinterpretation of Hercules myth in a Christian way. Christ reminds Magdalene and all the believers of the necessity of purification. The death on the cross, as the one at the stake of Hercules, are necessary to resuscitate. The mountainous landscape is somehow linked to the view from the window. In the Room of Arts, the allegories of the arts are frescoed. The theme of this room isn't from Ovid's Metamorphoses, and is decorated with a frieze sustained by Corinthian fluted columns. These columns delimit the spaces where Zelotti depicts the 6 allegories. Astronomy is on the northern wall, looking at the sky. Around her there are her work tools, the compass and the armillary sphere. She is followed by architecture, who is looking at the ground and holding a tea tree sop, while pointing at the map of a building. The book might be I 4 libri dell'architettura, aka the 4 books of architecture by Palladio. The personifications of architecture and astronomy are symmetrical and they look counterposed. One is observing and studying the ground, whereas the other one observes the sky. On the eastern wall there is music, playing the lute, and sculpture, sculpting a white marble statue. On the southern wall we found poetry holding a lyra with her left hand. The lyra is typical of poetry because it was the instrument used by poets to accompany their poems. Painting is depicted as a young woman painting an old prophet or a priest of the Old Testament. The 6 arts were frescoed by Zelotti, who, by portraying them all in different positions, succeeded in recreating movement and giving dynamism to the whole room. The art's theme is connected to the life of the villa, since it was considered to be ideal for gentlemen. On the eastern wall, the summer allegory is depicted wearing a crown of flowers. On the western wall, there is the allegory of winter, a mysterious figure covered by a long cloak. In the middle of the northern wall, there's a small painting depicting the Holy Family. In the foreground, a young Madonna holds baby Jesus in her arms, while covering him with a white blanket. Behind them, there's Joseph looking at the child.
The vestibule is a small passageway which allows you to reach the central hall. On both side walls there are 2 doors. One is real, whereas the other one is painted. Between the doors there are 2 frescoes that simulate 2 bronze statues contained in niches and recognizable in the allegories of conjugal harmony and the wise administration of domestic assets. The conjugal harmony is a bare-breasted female figure wrapped in Roman clothes. On her left hand she has 2 hearts on fire, which allude to marriage as the only legitimate form of love. Instead, the bare breast refers to fertility. As for the wise administration of domestic assets, the female figure is wrapped in a Roman peplum and she holds a rotulo in her right hand. The allegory has a counterpart in the matrimonial representations of Roman art, especially in sarcophagi of the imperial age. The rotulo could be interpreted as the tabulae nuptialis, a visible evidence of marriage traditionally held by the groom during the celebration of the rite. The decoration of the vestibule is completed by a mock pergola supported by wooden beams, culminating in a barrel vault. The latter is characterized by a nova opening where a winged Cupid is holding some white and red roses, which represent, respectively, purity and passion. The central hall has a square-shaped floor plan which is introduced by a majestic arch. Throughout the perimeter of the walls there are foam-made columns in Corinthian style, whereas the space in between the columns allows the entrance to the other rooms. On the top of the access areas there are frescoed 2 episodes of Roman history, adapted from Factorum et Dictorum Memorabilium, by the Latin author Valerio Massimo. Scipione's magnanimity and the killing of Virginia are in fact the 2 main works on the lounge walls, which also include minor decorative frescoes too. The fresco, which sees Scipione, skillful Roman warrior, as its main character, gives to the viewer a chance to see the man, generous and gentle spirit. This episode shows Scipione returning a beautiful lady to her family. After the conquest of Carthage, Scipione is gifted with a beautiful lady, but he eventually learns she is already engaged with his nemesis, Prince Alluccio. In this painting, we see Scipione gently approaching the girl's father and fiancé. The father is kneeling in front of him, whereas the fiancé is bowing, showing gratitude. Another relevant fresco in the lounge area is the one showing the killing of Virginia, a young Roman girl of plebeian origin who received some advances by Appio Claudio, a powerful patrician. The girl was already engaged to one of Rome's tribunes, therefore refused Appio Claudio's proposal. He then tried to make her his property by declaring in front of a crowd that she was one of his slaves. Eventually, in order to free her, her father killed her, because he thought it was the only way for her to gain her free will back. The fresco shows the scene right after Virginia's death. We see her lifeless body lying on the floor and the back of his father, who is still holding the bloody knife.
We can rightly say that Giovanni Battista Zelotti reached his maturity as a painter with a cycle of frescoes in the central hall of Villa Emo. On the walls are depicted pagan gods Jupiter, Juno, Neptune and Cybele. The gods are depicted in gold-colored monochrome in a fake niche, and they wear typical clothes of the Roman age. Jupiter, king of the gods, is represented with a tunic and a thunderbolt in his hand, symbol of the divinity and fire. Juno, Jupiter's wife, is the most important goddess in the pagan world. The peacock behind her is her symbol and represents the air. Neptune and Cybele, respectively, have a dolphin and a lion. The first symbolizes the element of water, the second of the earth. Above the niches there are flowers and fruit garlands, framing two monochrome frescoes with figures of dubious interpretation. These festoons are hanging on the capitals of Corinthian fake columns. On the sides of the gods there are several objects related to the military field to indicate that members of the Emo family gained important roles in the war. You can then find a shield, a battering ram and a quiver. Below the fake niches there are several prisoners that aim at pointing out the Emo family's land and sea victories against the Turks, the French and the Germans. The prisoner under Jupiter wears a turban, symbol of Venetian victory against the invasion of the Ottoman Empire. The prisoner under Juno, however, has European physical appearance and wants to represent the Cambrai League War, in which Leonardo Emo emerged. Prisoners are made bright and voluminous through the play of lights, their muscles and their sculpted shapes. To increase realism, Zelotti makes the legs of the two prisoners hang from the cornice on which they lay, thus creating a shaded shadow at the bottom. Finally, under the prisoners are represented monochromes of golden color, depicting triumphal scenes. Each monochrome illustrates a part of the long procession that accompanied the victorious general at his entrance in Rome. On the south wall that marks the access to the central hall from the vestibule, at the sides of the big entry archway, there are two mock Corinthian columns that support a gable, from which two prosperous female figures stand out. They lie along the frames and represent the allegory of prudence and peace. Prudence holds a mirror in which her image is reflected, an indispensable tool to look inside oneself, observe one's own soul, and get to know one's own strengths and weaknesses before acting. Peace has an olive branch in her right hand and a cornucopia in her left, which are the symbols of agricultural prosperity. At the sides of these allegories, two monochromatic violet panels depict two stories taken from Ovid's Metamorphoses. The god Apollo's love for the nymph Daphne on the left, and the poetic competition between Apollo and Pan on the right. In the first one, the nymph, in the attempt to escape from Apollo's pursuit, struck by Eros' harp and gold-tipped arrow inflaming his love for Daphne, is turning into a laurel plant, thanks to the gods who came to her aid. This episode symbolizes the victory of chastity over the amorous passion of senses. In the second one, the satyr Pan, who claimed to play better than the god, challenged Apollo in a poetic competition. Pan and Apollo chose Mollus to be the judge of the contest. Pan played his instrument supported by his friend Midas, who was accompanying him, but Mollus proclaimed Apollo as the winner. Midas dared to contest the verdict, and for this reason Apollo punished him, transforming his ears into donkey's ears. This episode symbolizes the victory of reason over the senses. Under the two monochromes there are two mock-blind windows surrounded by frames, shelves, and a gable, and decorated with flower festoon. In the middle of the gable there are two monochromatic busts of Antonino Pio on the left and Julius Caesar on the right. The same scheme is repeated on the north wall, but the two windows are rear. Above them there are the two busts of Octavian and Pompeius. Instead of the two monochromes, there are other smaller windows that unlight the entire wall. Over the large door overlooking the park, there was once another window, which has now been blocked to house the Emo family's coat of arms.
Since 1996, Villa Emo has been included among the UNESCO Heritage Sites. It is open to visitors all year long and hosts events such as temporary exhibitions, concerts, shows, wedding parties. It's definitely one of the most significant symbols of Palladio's artistic production.